What's going on to all my Only Murder fans out there, and welcome back to my channel, Movie Files. We are back discussing this second season, episode 9, which was titled Sparring Partners, which unfortunately means we got one episode left, which is next week's finale, and I'm going to give you my thoughts and theories later in this video, but today, there's some moments we got to break down in this 9th episode. I'm talking Rose Cooper. I'm talking about the real daddy of William and Detective Cripps. His motives and the things he would do for the person he loves. We have a lot to discuss in today's breakdown, and we're going to spoil it all. But before we get into the breakdown, if this happens to be your first time watching one of my videos, I want to take the moment to thank you all. I want to welcome you to the community. If you enjoy early movie reviews, daily and weekly TV breakdowns, and live discussions, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting that notification bell. If you enjoyed today's breakdown, let's give this video a thumbs up. Let's try to put a challenge out there. Let's challenge this video to 200 plus likes. But also share this video to anyone and everyone you know that loves this show just as much as we do. But more importantly, I make these videos to interact with you all, and I can't thank you all enough for the continued support. But let me know your thoughts on this 9th episode from Becky, Butler, and why is Poppy doing this with Cinda? What does she have over her? And we've been talking about it for weeks. There's more than one killer. There's possibly more than 2 killers or people involved in the murder of Bunny. We got our criminal mastermind, we got our puppet, but who was the actual killer? Let me know your thoughts on that, and of course what you all hope to see in next week's finale. Let's talk about it all in the comments below. So this is going to be a fun time, as it is every single week. With all that being said, full spoilers ahead as we open the episode with Detective Cripps' motives, and of course it boils down to money issues. We see that he is living paycheck to paycheck, and we see him taking these different side jobs, for example, being a security guard. We see him tampering with evidence, which leads him to meeting someone at the chicken bar, and that's where things get crazy. Now, we obviously will talk about who he's been meeting at this chicken bar, Cinda, but at first I'm like, okay, y'all know I've been talking about Cinda for the last few weeks, but I'm like, and y'all know how I feel about Poppy. Could it be Poppy? Is she the criminal mastermind? Could it be Rose Cooper herself? We're going to get into that reveal again, Cinda, and what is her motives? Why is she doing all this? Is it really just for fame? We'll talk about that a little bit later, but meanwhile, we see that money is a very strong motive as Charles and Mabel try to figure out why would Detective Cripps kill Bunny, and this again goes back to them putting on the board the criminal mastermind. We got the criminal mastermind, we got the puppet, but who is the killer or killers? We still have a big mystery box on that. But as we check back in, we see that Oliver is indeed the father of William, or at least that's what he's telling William from now, because he has a big moment with Teddy in this episode. We see that Oliver wants to celebrate this big news as he gives Charles Geraldine. He doesn't want it, which leads them to discovering a hidden drawer. And surprise, surprise, it's the original painting that we've been talking about. It almost feels like, what was that, episode 2, when we got the Rose Cooper painting, that it wasn't the original. So now we have the original, and we also find out a little bit more about that painting in this episode. As speaking of gifts, we cut to our scene in which Alice is paying a visit to Mabel, and she has a gift for her, which is a puzzle. And this is a really interesting moment. I really enjoyed this moment for the Mabel character, because surprisingly, she thanks Alice for helping her realize that her life is more than living in the worst parts. And this is the moment where we see Alice leaves, and for the moment, not going to be together, which I think is a good thing, because we see that Mabel, she kind of picks her wrong, love interest. She can't trust people. She can't trust Alice, and I totally agree with her. I still have my inklings and my suspicions on Alice. I don't know if we're going to see her in next week's finale. I think we will, and I'll get to that in the end of this video, because I still think there's something more to her family, her backstory, and how does she know about Cinda? She was the one that pointed Mabel in that direction. We'll get to that a little bit later, but I don't know if we're going to get any more of her this season, and it's going to be more of season 3. Let me know how you all feel about Alice, where you're at mentally with the character, and do you, like me, believe there's more to her character? Let's speculate about that in the comments below. But getting back into the conversation, Miss Leonora, who isn't who she says she is, we see Charles calls a living facility and discovers that Leonora that we met weeks ago was a fraud, and she is the one and only Rose Cooper. Meanwhile, we see that William learns the news of his father being Oliver, which we'll discuss again. That wasn't the truth. This whole season, the theme is what these parents would do to protect their kids. by lying to them to protect them, right? So that's a big theme that we got in not only this episode, but of course this season thus far, which brings us into a perfect follow-up scene, which shows Charles looking at the watch that his father gave him, which leads him to a dress that he finds in the back of this watch, and it appears to be the location of where he can find Rose Cooper. Meanwhile, we see Mabel finds the address of where Cripps lives, and it's time for our characters to pay a visit to these characters, and it looks like it's time for them to fight. We have Mabel versus Detective Cripps in the ring, who's going to be questioning him, and then we have Charles versus the fake Laura Dean, aka Rose Cooper, and let's go ahead and throw in Oliver and Teddy, which let's just kind of focus on that big reveal that we got in the episode, which we get the moment where Oliver tells Teddy that he is indeed the father of William. Now, it appears that Teddy didn't know that he was the father. He said that he slept with Oliver's wife not once, but twice in the same night. That is, we got to have the technicality of the sexual affairs that they had. But in all seriousness, I did enjoy this moment of the fathers kind of talking about not only how they wanted to be different fathers than their fathers, because it seems like neither one of them, I'm talking about Oliver and Teddy, didn't have the best relationship with their father. And in doing so, it's one of those conversations that you have that you're trying to intentionally do better than what you were learned as a kid. And unfortunately, when you're trying to force something, it can kind of hurt relationships. We see that with Teddy and obviously Theo. And we see Oliver just always wants to push to be the best dad, but sometimes that causes a bit of a rift between the two, right? And we obviously saw them come back together. He gets his son into the theater. But again, I just love how they're just tying all these, trying to amend the sins of your father. Again, that's such a central theme that has been really highlighted really well in this season for me. But again, going back into this conversation, we see that they just ultimately want to protect their sons, and Oliver and Teddy agree to never let this secret out about William, which I believe, if not next week, the reveal of who William's father is will be revealed inevitably. Again, it could be next week. It could be in season 3. I think that that's secret, because it seems like secrets in this show always find their way to the light. It will be inevitably revealed who the father is. But getting back into our other fighting sparring partners in this episode, we see that Mabel grills Detective Cripps about how there's no way he could have set up this whole situation. He's just not that smart, as Cripps starts to spill the beans about landing the smartest woman on the planet and making a better podcast than they have with All Is Not Okay. That's a big moment. And Mabel, she's a great detective. She knew how to poke at him and get it, because she stabbed him in the arm a couple weeks ago, all pun intended there. But she knew how to poke the bear. She knew how to get information out of him, and she got that information. Smartest woman on the planet. They have a better podcast than you. She puts 2 and 2 together, and we'll talk about that reveal a little bit later. But she also finds out about the whole chicken connection and puts that to the puzzle as she actually uses the puzzle that was given to her, and then she starts to put, again, the pieces to the puzzle together. But we're going to talk about her a little bit later. Let's talk about Rose Cooper as she gives the details to Charles about why she did what she did, about stealing someone's identity and what she's been doing and how she went about missing for so many years. She ultimately shows Charles a mystery painting of Charles' dad, who ultimately just wanted to be a father for his son. Again, it's the conversation. It's generational kind of issues within the father of our characters. We heard that about Oliver not necessarily being close to his dad. We see the relationship between Charles and his father. We saw Mabel and her losing her father and how that impacted our characters. Again, if there's one thing that I can say that has been really integral to this season is, and we'll talk about it next week as far as maybe the inconsistencies compared to season 1, but I will say the highlighting the performances, who these characters are and their past has been one of the highlights for me in this entire season. But we got more to reveal in this episode. As we wrap it all up, Mabel is looking for Cinda, and she finds Poppy, who's trying to warn her that she should leave before Cinda arrives. Mabel tells her she discovered all the stuff that she broke down in this episode and she wants her to leave. We cut back to Rose, who tells about how she was happy Charles was the one that found him painting, because there was a woman that kept pestering her and sniffing around it, which leads us to Poppy telling Mabel that Cinda is willing to do whatever to get what she wants. We see Detective Cripps was the one giving Cinda the evidence for her podcast, and she was the one that he met at the chicken joint, which leads us to the big moment here. Poppy lets Mabel know that she's not who she says she is. She's actually revealed to be Becky Butler, the victim and the centerpiece, which made Cinda's podcast so big. And it's also such just a huge moment. And again, I want to go back to why that moment's so big. Number one, if you all are like, wait, Becky Butler was the centerpiece of Cinda's podcast. It's Not Okay, the Oklahoma, that was what got our crew together, right? And if you all recall, Cinda was she was giving, she was nice. She was the one that shouted them out on the Jimmy Fallon show. So she's two-faced, right? She could be nice, she could be evil. But again, Becky in her podcast was killed, was murdered, and Cinda blamed, I want to say it was the mayor of the town, and brought like the turkey to his house. And that ties to the whole Sting episode when they gave Sting the turkey and they thought that he was the killer of Tim, which it wasn't the case. But again, it makes you think, okay, Becky Butler's alive and her uncle was looking for her and the whole dog and everything. So what is it that Cinda has over Becky to make her want to continue to go on with this lie, to not give her up and tell the police or tell someone what she actually did? That's the question, and I'm very curious about. Let me know your thoughts on that. But again, Becky Butler, she's alive, and it just goes to show you the lengths that Cinda is willing to do to get this big podcast, to get all these big things, which makes me think, as far as next week's episode goes, she's going to probably be the main focus. We're going to probably get her backstory, get her understanding, learn her motives, but also more importantly, she was able to manipulate Detective Cripps, someone down and out, someone that needed money, who was desperate for money, but also kind of fell in love. And I don't think it's a two-way street. I think Cinda's just completely manipulated him to get what she wants. But then who's her other puppet master? Who is the actual killer? Who's the one that actually killed Bunny is the big question at hand, which makes me go back to, there has to be a reason why they showed Nina's husband. I think there's something to be said about him and this whole, modifying the building and being the head of the board and all this different stuff. I feel like he has something to do with this, but also it brings me back to Alice and her motives, because I go back to it again. Alice was the one that pointed Mabel in the direction of Cinda. When she put the pieces to the puzzle, it was on that puzzle, her podcast. But why would she give up Cinda? What are their connections? So I don't know if Alice is the actual killer. It's just making me think in my head. We kind of left Marv out from last week. I still have some feelings about Nina's husband. And who else is out there? We talked about Ivan. I don't think Ivan would have done this. He seemed to really care about Bunny. And I go back to the night that Bunny died, when we saw her get actually murdered in her episode. When that person came to her door, she knew who they were. She was very upset. She was very like, oh, you again. I'm just trying to think in my head who's had beef with Bunny, who's been on her nerve, who's been someone that's been pestering her. And it makes me go back to Nina's husband, someone that was probably pushing her out of the board, that wanted to get these modifications. That's who my number one suspect is right now. I could be completely wrong, is Nina's husband. But then the question would be, why? Why would he be involved? Does he have an affair with Cinda? Oh, I can go on and on and on with all these different theories, but I'm going to wrap this video up. But what a great episode. Again, I love the acting. I love the performances. I thought the reveals were really well done. Rose Cooper, we finally get the reveal there. That's been lingering for weeks. The Teddy, Daddy, William thing, I think there's still to be had, still some more story involved in that besides the big reveal. And of course, what has Theo been doing this whole time? So we got a lot to fulfill in next week's finale. I think we're going to end on the cliffhanger because we already know we're getting to season 3. So we'll see how satisfying the finale is going to be. But nonetheless, I'm excited for it. I'm here for it. I'll be back next week talking about it. But in the meantime, let's discuss this 9th episode. Highs, lows, pros, cons, thoughts, theories, predictions, and everything in between. Let's talk about it in the comments. If you stuck around to this point in the video, let's have some fun in the comments. Put in the comments I'm trying to think of a fun emoji. Just put Cinda. Put the word Cinda and put equals question mark. Who do you think Cinda is also working with? Put that in the comments, and of course, all your thoughts in the comments as well. I thank you all for supporting the video. I thank you for sticking on to this point. Before you all leave, make sure to like, share, comment, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We have so much to discuss in next week's finale. I'm so excited to be back with you all next week. In the meantime, check out my reviews that I currently have on my channel, movie reviews, TV reviews, and so much more. Come and join the community. Check out my reviews for this very awesome show that we're discussing today. Check out my most recent breakdown, and we'll catch you all on the next video. We'll be right back.